Let's do that hockey.
Welcome back to Dobber Prospects Radio. Very excited for this episode because I'm joined by half of the Dobber Prospects Fantasy Hockey League and contributors to Dobber Prospects, writers, scouts, prospect experts. We had our annual prospect entry draft just after Christmas during the March break. It was kind of fun to watch World Juniors and do a fantasy draft at the same time. Usually it's in the summer, but with COVID impacting the world the way it does, that was kind of fun, kind of a different experience for the draft. So like the episode that I did a while ago with Steve Laidlaw, where we went over another fantasy draft, it's very similar. So this is a 15-team league for anyone who hasn't heard the details about it on previous episodes. All the owners or managers of teams are Dobber Prospects, writers, or alumni. And it's a full roster league, so 15 teams with a 25-man roster and then a full 25-man prospect bench. The only players eligible for our entry draft are players who went through the NHL entry draft in 2020 or players who signed contracts between the end of the season and now that had previously never had their NHL rights owned. So NCAA and European free agents, not to put too fine a point on it. So with that being said, I'm very happy to be joined by this is an epic guest episode. I've never had this many guests on at once, so if there's some technical difficulties, I apologize. But welcome back for a second appearance on the show, Hayden Soboleski, our Colorado Avalanche owner and Toronto Maple Leafs prospect writer for Dobber Prospects, and the admin of this fantasy league, and he does a super awesome job. Thanks for joining us, Hayden. Welcome.
Thank you, Pete.
And listeners of this show, I don't think you've ever been on, Will, but they'll be very familiar with your own YouTube sensation show. Will Scouching, the GM of our Minnesota Wild team, joins us. Thanks, Will. Welcome.
Oh, you're very welcome. Happy to be here. I didn't know I was sensational.
It's true. It's true. Also joining me is a repeat offender on the podcast, Brayden Olofson, our New York Rangers owner and prospect writer. Brayden, welcome back.
Hey, Peter. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, man, this is going to be fun. Okay, so first time, long time, Dave Hall. He is our Columbus Blue Jackets owner and writer. Dave, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Right on, right on. And another first time, long time, we have Mark Hillier, Angry Puck, known on Twitter. He's our Edmonton Oilers guy. He owns the Oilers. Welcome, Mark, for joining the podcast.
Hey, Pete. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, man. Thanks for joining. And last but certainly not least, the latest addition to the league, we have Nick Kawka, who's... How do I pronounce your last name, Nick? Because that doesn't sound right.
That's pretty good, actually. Kawka is how you pronounce it.
Kawka? Okay. So Nick is our Nashville Predators owner, and he just joined the league as an expansion team, which was a lot of fun. So we did our expansion draft process before this all started. And, with the Seattle Krakens coming up, and it looks like I might be poised to take over an expansion team in another league as well. Nick, I might have to have you come back on, and we can talk all about fantasy hockey and expansion drafts. That could be a fun episode too. But thanks for joining me today. We're going to talk about our draft. So without further ado, let's get to it. It was a 15-round draft, and I think everyone who's on the call had a first-round pick, fortunately, which will mean everyone's involved. The first pick was owned by the New York Islanders, and they're not represented on the call, but no surprise there. They took Alexis Lafreniere first overall. I guess the way our league scoring format goes, it's a rotisserie head-to-head, so it's categories that count. And for forwards, it's goals, assists, plus-minus, power play, shorthanded, penalty minutes, hits, blocks, and face-off wins. So based on our scoring format, in the other league that I'm in, very similar format, he went first as well there, but Steve said he would have taken Byfield first overall. So I'll just kind of throw this out wide open to anyone who thinks that that they had a different player in mind if they had the first overall pick? Go ahead, anybody.
I want to know what Will would have done with the first overall pick, because between him and I, we talked quite a lot about the second overall pick, which obviously you'll get to next, Pete, but I'm curious what Will's thoughts are here.
Oh yeah, I mean, I look at Quinton Byfield as a bit more valuable in this league long term, but I mean, my team is. I've been trying to tell myself that I want my team to be like a contender for the last couple of seasons, and I'm not sure Byfield pushes that. But I mean, the hits, the face-offs, that is a factor that will certainly come into play for him. I don't know how much Lafreniere is going to be throwing his weight around or blocking shots. I don't think he's going to be taking many face-offs. Like, he's going to be a valuable offensive guy, but I mean, it was a much close. I think it would have been a very, very close one. Honestly, the interest from second overall was more about taking whoever didn't go first. But getting third ain't so bad.
Right. I probably would have taken Lafreniere first overall too. I'm not sure how much he'll move the needle on the peripheral stats like hits and face-off wins, because he's a winger as opposed to a center. But you make a good point there that he'll be contributing right out of the gate. That's the expectation anyways. That was the same thought we had with Capo Caco and Jack Hughes last year, and they didn't really move the needle either. Does anyone think that Byfield's going to play in the NHL? So before the draft, way back early COVID stages, I had Craig Button on, and we were talking about how Byfield should go back to the OHL because he hasn't really dominated at any level yet. And I still stand by that, but the only caveat here is there might not be an OHL season for him to go to. So if there isn't, I guess obviously he stays with the Kings. Does anyone else see any other potential outcome for Byfield going into the season?
I would think in any kind of regular season, Pete, that we'd see Byfield get his, half dozen games or whatever, right? And then in what we're dealing with now with the truncated season, I almost wonder if that makes the circumstances kind of lend themselves towards Byfield playing, an extended audition up until when his entry level slide comes into effect in LA. And obviously the main factor there though is if he's going to be able to contribute and prosper in Los Angeles. I don't know.
All right, Brayden. Well, you had the second overall pick. And let's just get right to it here. You picked Byfield at second overall. Bit of a no-brainer there, right? So if he went first overall, would you have been disappointed?
No, I wouldn't have been disappointed getting Lafreniere at second overall at all. No.
Right.
And like I mentioned earlier,
and he's a Ranger.
And he's a Ranger, exactly. So, and one of the big reasons I took over writing for the Rangers with Dobber Prospects, I think I've mentioned this before on the podcast, is my wife is a Rangers fan, and I grew up a Leafs fan, but anyhow, I would have been happy, and she's always watching my fantasy drafts and over the shoulder, that sort of thing. So I think she would have been happy about me getting Lafreniere anyways. But
if your wife's a Ranger fan, you are too. It's like that scene in Pulp Fiction where Sam Jackson's like, "My wife's a vegetarian," which pretty much makes me a vegetarian.
Yes. So, but in the real world, I ended up here with Quinton Byfield, and I've got no complaints in that choice either. That being said, I didn't have any requirements or expectations for Byfield to play this year. I would have made that pick, if Los Angeles had even come out and said out of the gate that we're going to be sending Quinton back to the OHL right after they made the selection. Obviously, that wouldn't happen, but I would have made this selection either way. That being said, Will and I did have a few talks leading up to the draft about trading this pick. And I don't know if I would have had the balls that he did to pick Rossi at third, but that probably would have been the guy that I'd have been after. If I could have ended up somewhere in the 5 slot, 6 slot, something like that in the draft. So I think Will did really good, but also took a really big swing there at 3.
All right. Well, spoiler alert, third overall, Will Scouch, Minnesota Wild, picks Marco Rossi. So going into the draft, a lot of the analysts and pundits on TV and podcasts were saying that It's a clear-cut first overall. It's Alexis Lafreniere, and then it's the closer race is between Tim Stützle and Quinton Byfield. And Will goes ahead and jumps to Q and takes Marco Rossi, who kind of fell in the NHL draft a little bit. I think he went 9th overall to Minnesota, and Buffalo taking Jack Quinn, his Ottawa 67's teammate, ahead of him. Bit of a head scratcher for most people, I think. I guess that's the kind of thing that happens when a franchise fires its entire scouting staff leading up to the draft. So, Will, let's talk a little bit about why you like Marco Rossi right here so much. Is it because of the scoring and the fantasy slant that we put on it? Or if you were an NHL GM, would you have also taken him before Tim Stützle or Lucas Raymond?
Well, on my personal list going into the draft, he was at 3 for me. Stützle and Raymond were not far behind. But when it comes to fantasy, especially in this league, my hunch is that it's more likely that Marco Rossi plays center for the Minnesota Wild. I think he could play center for them this year. Like, all you got to do is look at who they have at center. And, even if the team wins one game this season, I'd rather him sort of grinding it out in the NHL and learning how to play there and play as a center. And I think that's more likely for Rossi to play center down the road than Stützle would. And so, you need centers in this league for sure. It certainly helps. I think Marco Rossi throws his weight around a lot more than Tim Stützle, a big issue that I had with Stützle last year. Now, he was playing against men, granted, but, just needs to get stronger, which is a big thing for him, but he's not known for really throwing his weight around a whole lot. Marco Rossi is going to be a center, so the opportunity of blocking shots on a team that isn't likely to be extremely talented in Minnesota, it all just kind of added up. Plus, I've got brand loyalty. I am the Minnesota Wild. And so, that can't lie if that didn't factor in. But the big thing with him is just the two-way game all around, just so talented. Goal scorer, but also a playmaker, and then also just a natural center. So kind of, I think at the end of the day, Stützle might score more points in his NHL career, but in terms of value in this league specifically, I kind of went with my guy.
Yeah, I think I'm with Brayden. That's a ballsy pick, but I don't disagree with it. And if I owned Minnesota Wild and had the 3rd overall pick, I probably would have gone with the brand loyalty as well. Kind of funny that way. There's no money involved in this pool, right? It's just bragging rights. So you really don't have a lot on the line to lose here. It's not going to cost you hundreds of dollars if you screw up a pick or a trade here and there. And it's really fun to have the guy that you like to cheer for. And so I don't think Rossi was a stretch, that being said. I think Tim Stützle has a higher offensive pedigree, maybe. Hard to really say that because Marco Rossi, led the CHL in scoring last season, and I think he's done with junior hockey, and I think he's poised to play in the NHL this season, or was. Apparently, he got injured. So let's talk about the guy who you picked over him. Arizona Coyotes were up next. Keith owns them, but he's not online. He took Tim Stützle. Does anyone want to chime in on this that we haven't heard from yet? Maybe like Nick or Dave or Mark. How do you guys rank the top 4? Because that's where we're at right now. Does anyone have it a little bit different? Would you have picked someone different in there? Let's try Mark.
Yeah, okay. First of all, I just want to say, this was my first draft, and as you guys know, my strategy in the first few rounds was to not draft. That pick at number 3 was originally mine, or not originally mine. I traded for it and won the lottery, moved from 6 till 3. And I had been talking to Will about that pick, and I was pretty sure he was going to take Rossi with that pick, and I thought about it myself, but I prefer to get a guy that's a little closer to the NHL, although Rossi may play this year. And despite the injury that was announced, I think today, but I traded that pick to him for Cody Glass because I think he's going to have a better opportunity sooner, although maybe not a higher upside in the long run. So yeah, and Stützle, I think that he might be, in the short term, the better choice between Rossi and Stützle. I think if I had have kept that pick, I probably would have went Rossi as well, because I think centers are probably more valuable in our league, and I'm not sure that Stützle is a center. And Rossi, I think, is probably going to have a really good chance to take over the number one center spot in Minnesota pretty soon. So that's probably, I probably would have went with Rossi as well, but I was also okay making that trade with Will.
That's an interesting trade. So the third overall for Cody Glass with the Vegas Golden Knights. So it's I guess you could argue that Cody Glass is a little bit more NHL ready at this point than Rossi. I mean, we're not sure if Rossi's going to make the team or not, or go back to. I guess he's aged out of junior because he's a late birthday, right? Or he could have gone to.
I think he's on record saying he's either going to play in Switzerland Pro or in North America Pro, but I don't think it's like NHL or Switzerland.
Right. I knew that there was some reason why he'd ruled out another year of junior hockey. And let's be frank, he doesn't really need to play junior hockey anymore. He kind of dominated last year pretty hard. So there's not really any reason for him to go back. So make some money, play pro hockey. So let's get someone who wasn't involved in that trade. Let's go to Hayden. How do you like that trade? Who do you think both sides win? Is it a little too soon to tell?
I think there were a few more pieces in it, but I can't remember them. But obviously the main parts of it was Rossi for Glass. I feel like most people wouldn't have made that trade or traded away the pick just because you have a little bit more ownership and a little bit more excitement. Like when you get to choose who the top end player is you have. When you have a pick that high, you know you're getting someone special. You know you're getting someone that is going to be a big part of your fantasy team for a long time. And just having the freedom to make that pick yourself rather than have to pick someone that someone else is willing to trade away I don't see that very often in fantasy hockey. But that being said, Cody Glass is like a pretty high pedigree prospect himself, and Vegas knows how to score and is poised to be a strong team in that division once the divisions get back to normal. So I thought it was a fairly even trade.
Drafting is definitely fun. I enjoyed being involved in fantasy drafts. That's really the main reason why I'm in fantasy hockey leagues. But I do believe that if you're trading the third overall pick just before your entry draft starts, its value will never be higher, right? Like I think you might be able to win that trade. I'm not saying that it was a win. I think this is a pretty square deal. It's hard to tell when you're trading green bananas, which one's going to taste better in a few years. But that was an interesting trade. So we got Lafreniere, Byfield, and Rossi all going in the top three. So Tim Stützle slips to fourth overall, and he's picked by Arizona. So that's not much of a shock there. And then we go to Columbus, who we've got on the horn. Dave picked Columbus fifth overall. Dave, why don't you explain to us your draft strategy with the guy you picked?
So mine was pretty easy. For the record, I really wanted Rossi. I was hoping he'd fall to 5, even though I secretly knew he wouldn't. But so thanks for that. But my strategy was pretty easy. I just actually took over Columbus this summer, and I actually cleaned house quite a bit. I got rid of a lot of minor contracts. So my draft strategy is quite easy. It's just basically pick the best available guy. And for me, it was easily Lucas Raymond. Especially, I'm pretty good. I'm good in the goaltending. I got Shesterkin and Samsonov, so I'm quite happy with those young guys. And I was happy with my center as well. So I think right wing Lucas Raymond was a pretty easy decision for me.
Okay, you just mentioned something that I want to talk about. You talked about your team needs, and we're at the fifth overall pick. So at this point in the draft, is anybody looking at like how much value do you put on filling team needs versus going with Dave's strategy of picking the best player available. So Dave just said he just takes the best player available. What do you like to do there, Mark?
Well, I think it depends, I guess, on where I think my team is, what I think my chances are, and if I like, what I need. So, yeah, I mean, I guess it depends. It all depends on the exact situation there. So I think my team is, I think, ready to contend right now, and didn't have a lot of holes to fill. So I would draft current year draft players. I wouldn't be going after just like filling a hole with a big contract or something like that.
Right. I misspoke at the intro when I explained the league. I lied. I said the only players eligible for this draft are entry draft guys and previously unknown players. That's inaccurate. I'm confusing my leagues. Sorry about that. You could also pick any unknown free agent player. And with only 15 teams and it's a hard salary cap, there's a lot of star players who are very expensive, but star players who are unknown and were available for the draft. Now, not a lot of teams have cap space, and it's a hard cap league, so you can't just drop players to make your cap work. You got to be really careful and selective, and that aspect of our league really puts a tremendous emphasis on cap value. Hayden, what do you think about in the top 5 picks of the draft, going for best player available versus team need?
Well, unless you've made a pretty big trade, if you're picking in the top 5, that means your team probably sucked last year, and you should probably be going for best player available.
Not wrong. He's not wrong.
Not wrong. We have a very competitive league. We don't often get teams like tanking or really sucking. But like, my point still stands. If you have a pick that high, you have it for a reason, and the top player, you can't pass up a chance for a top player. If you personally feel there's a big gap between like the best center available and the best right winger available, you shouldn't worry about where he's gonna slot in on, like, what eligibility Fantrax will have for him going forward.
Yeah, fair enough. The couple of leagues I'm in, bottom feeder teams have traded away their first round picks. So there are some pretty good teams that have, top 5 picks in some leagues, but I think in the range we're at here, these guys, they're a bit of a no-brainer. Their upside just far outweighs the immediate dividends you'd get from guys who are otherwise available that just don't have the same sort of projection that this caliber of player does. So the next guy picked was Boston Bruins owner Mason Black. He picked Alexander Holtz, New Jersey Devils winger. He was, the next best player, I think. I don't think anyone would kind of have any qualms or arguments about Alexander Holtz going 6 overall. Would anybody see it differently? Nope. So that moves us on to our expansion GM, Nashville. Nick, so you had the 7th overall, and so here's a good opportunity to talk about positional need versus best player available, because as an expansion team, you probably had some positional needs. Is this a thought that crossed your mind, or was this a decision you had to make, or the guy you picked, was he just no contest, this is who I'm taking?
I think it was kind of just no contest, I guess, going into it and taking a look at some of the drafts from the league in the past, trying to get a sense as to the value of players, and like how everyone spoke before about, how high do available free agents go with heavy contracts and the points they can produce. And then just looking what I was able to piece together pre-draft with the expansion. I think this is sort of almost automatic. I kind of thought that Askarov would be there at that spot in any case. So, and it's also a nice kicker too that I'm writing for Nashville, so that just makes things just that much more that much easier to follow. But
Yeah.
I have a couple okay goalies in the minors right now, but it's nice that there's a high ceiling for them, and I can just kind of make that pick right now for my goaltenders for the future, and then just turn the page on that and go into next year's draft and just focus elsewhere. So it was kind of automatic. I was really hoping he'd be there, and I figured he would be. If Holtz had slipped, I think I was looking at him too. But like everyone's saying, I think it's pretty automatic that best player available, even here at number 7 or 8, you just go with it. So
Yeah, and the way our scoring works, you've got basically skaters, which is all your forwards and defensemen grouped together in their same scoring categories, and then you've got goaltenders, and there's about 7 categories for each. So goalies can make or break a week, right? Because usually the margin of victory on skaters is not too wide. And then the goalies, you only have 1 or 2, and they have about 50% contribution to your week's victory or loss. So they're heavily weighted, I find, anyways. So getting a guy like Askarov who projects to be, a big deal, a franchise number 1, plays a lot, wins a lot, kind of pad your stats, is reassuring to have. The next guy picked was Carolina. Joki Nevalainen. He picked Cole Perfetti, Winnipeg Jets. I really liked that pick. I thought that was the way to go, which at that point, the top 8, that was kind of the first tier for me. And then there was a big drop off after that. And then Will's up again. He's got the 9th overall pick. So Will, at this point, were you shocked or not shocked by anyone that was picked, or were you thinking, man, I wish I would have had the 8th instead of the 9th overall pick? Or are you happy with your guy?
I was pretty happy with Lundell. I think there was a period where I was talking to a couple of people about moving back, and it was basically contingent on, none of Holtz, Perfetti, or Lundell being available at 9. I mean, Drysdale crossed my mind. I don't know how much value he's going to provide. Same goes for Jake Sanderson. But Anton Lundell for sure. Again, it's the center thing for sure. That's one big thing. Part of it is like seeing him play this year and what I saw last year. So there's a lot of things that sort of came together there. I think Florida is going to, based on how they drafted overall, I think they have a pretty good looking future. And so, all these things all coming together, I think Lundell, may not be the most efficient, again, similar to Rossi, not maybe a guy that's going to score 80 points a season, but certainly a useful player that's going to drive up a lot of useful data in this league that should help me, do stuff.
How do you feel about picking Lundell after the World Juniors? Because I was thinking exactly the way you just said, where he's more of a two-way guy. He's a center. He'll have some immediate dividends, but I thought that his ceiling was maybe a little bit limited offensively. And then in my World Juniors preview episode with Marco Pombino, we pontificated that, playing in Liga against men, that's kind of what his role was. And then at the World Juniors, he was the number 1 center. And I was like, so this is going to be an opportunity for him to kind of, flex his offensive muscle a little bit and show that he's got some skill and can score some goals. And he did exactly that. And that kind of changed my perspective of him, like if he just went into the World Juniors and played more defensively than offensively, my optimism for his progression offensively at the NHL level would have been diminished. Now it's a small, short tournament against, 18 and 19-year-old or younger players, not NHL players. But did that change your outlook or your optimism for his offensive output? I mean, fantasy hockey is really all about the offense, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, I think in my sort of thought process, in my view, anyone who has been playing against pro-level men's players in Finland for 2 years, this would have, under normal circumstances, been his 3rd World Junior Championship. I think he was hurt for last year's. I think all things being considered, for him to go back and look as good as he did, it's kind of expected. But I think it just goes to show, why, when you look at production and stuff in a men's league overseas, and if it might look underwhelming, you kind of need to keep things in focus. Like, yeah, he might not be the most aggressive offensive juggernaut, in the Liga at 17 or 18 years old, but the second he steps on the same ice surface as 17, 18, 19-year-old kids who have come from, say, the Czech Junior League or even the Czech Pro Leagues, but like the U.S. development team and all that stuff, you kind of see what sets him apart. There's a lot of pressure in the men's game. There's a lot of physical intensity. And he's a guy who just knows how to, maybe not the most physically intense guy, but he knows how to manage it properly. He knows how to read play and sort of anticipate things a step ahead. And that kind of was on display. I mean, but then he puts the puck on his stick in this tournament and just puts his shoulder down and does what he wants, basically. And it's kind of been on display over in Europe for a while. So for me, I thought, all right, there's offense if he's not on the in the Liga, but now you're starting to see all of those things sort of paying dividends. So again, like I said, he was kind of like my number 3 of 3, but I was more than happy to land him where I did.
Yeah, that's probably who I would have picked at 9th overall as well. And I would have been begrudgingly disappointed about having to do that. And then I would have been a little bit happier about it after the World Juniors. Does anyone have another guy that they would have taken at 9 before we went on this run on D?
I might jump in here. I honestly thought about going for maybe a skilled winger here. I thought, maybe not a Dawson Mercer, but I thought Rodion Amirov might be a guy that I might do in the top 10. I did think about Jake Sanderson as well, but I thought that he might slip a little further than he did, but he did not make it as far as I needed him to make it. So I did not.
Yeah. Well, your next pick wasn't until 29th, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I figured there would be an overcorrection, 24. Right? Like post-draft, people see Jake Sanderson and not scoring points and all that, and I figured there'd be like an overcorrection in fantasy leagues of people drafting him way lower than 5, but it was a gamble, but it didn't work, at least not for me.
Yeah, that's the downside about being in a league that has a lot of astute and savvy prospect guys, that there's not many players slip or too many mistakes made. Okay, so the next 3 picks were defensemen, like I alluded to, and Calgary Flames, Joel Henderson, Toronto Maple Leafs, myself, and then Hayden picked right after me with Colorado. We all picked D, and I tend to not put a lot of value or emphasis on D, but to my point a minute ago, picking for your fantasy team needs versus the best player available, after we got past the 9th pick, my strategy kind of changed. So I was hoping to move up or down in the draft here because I was in the sweet spot where I didn't want to be. I either wanted to be in the top 9 and get one of those blue chip prospects, or I was kind of hoping to trade down and improve my assets. I had a lot of draft picks. I had more draft picks than I had roster spots for. So trading, the 11th for 2 seconds didn't really make a lot of sense because I couldn't fit them in. And my team is kind of really feeling the pressure of the salary cap. And I had a position to fill on defense. So that's why I went with the player I picked. But Joel picked just before me, and he took Jamie Drysdale, Anaheim Ducks. He was the consensus by far and away, and it's not even close, top-ranked defenseman at the start of the season last year. And lo and behold, he was the second player picked at the NHL draft right after Jake Sanderson. But we kind of flipped that around here for our draft. Brayden, hadn't heard from you for a bit. So between Drysdale and Sanderson, why do you think Drysdale went ahead of Sanderson in our fantasy format? And is that the way you would have done it too?
Yeah, I would have went that way, I think. And I guess it comes down to personal preference in some cases, probably. Drysdale, you probably have a little more faith that he's going to contribute on the offensive side of things, I think, than you would have that kind of faith in Jake Sanderson, probably. And if I'm making that pick where Joel is, I'm probably doing the exact same thing. By that same token, I think you can probably rely on Jake Sanderson for some of the more peripheral stats. But as we've found in this league, I think those peripheral stats are a lot easier to come by claiming a guy on waivers or just through the free agent pool that has a nice small cap hit. You know, in the future, if you're relying on Jake Sanderson for some here and there offense, but more or less really relying on him for his block shots or such peripheral stats as that, then chances are you're paying him way more money than you could pay another guy, who could provide the same sort of value later on. So like I say, I would have made the Drysdale pick there as well, or made the pick that I did a couple of selections later.
Right. Yeah, you picked back to back after this run on D. Mark or Nick, would either of you guys gone with Jake Sanderson over Drysdale in this format?
I like Drysdale for much of what was said before too. I think he's labeled as that offensive source from the blue line, and I think that he's going to fit that mold, or he's going to live up to that top billing. And I find that Sanderson is not that he's not offensive, but he's sort of that overall contributor. Whereas I don't know if the offense is going to translate as much to the pro level as the peripherals, like we were discussing before. So I think Sanderson is still a great pick. Definitely he's gonna grow really, really well with that Senators team and come up and hopefully be the Jared Cowan that never was for Carlson here for Shabbat. But I really do think that Drysdale, he's got that sort of that sexiness, that fantasy appeal. But I think Sanderson's still a good pick, and I think it makes sense where he went in this draft here, just 2 spots below.
Right on. Anyone else think different?
Yeah, well, I agree with that assessment. Actually, I would have went Drysdale before Sanderson, but I would have been happy to get either one of those guys. But I did, a lot of my research for this draft I did by listening to you guys on your podcasts, and it seems like most people would have picked Drysdale ahead of Sanderson. So that's where I got my pick from.
Right on. So right in between those, it was my pick. Toronto Maple Leafs at 11th overall. And on my previous episode, like this one with Steve Laidlaw, we kind of mocked my dad for picking Mikko Lehtinen in the first round. He's a free agent signed with the Toronto Maple Leafs coming over from the KHL. He had a really good performance last year and started this year really strong in the KHL too, scoring like a point a game, led the league in defense scoring last year. So as I mentioned, I had a positional need here, and he comes in on an entry-level contract. So I'm hoping that he can contribute in a top 4 capacity with the Leafs this season, making, the league minimum or a really, really affordable entry-level contract. So that was part of my reasoning with going with this one. There's the brand loyalty as well, as Will pointed out. He's a Maple Leafs player, and I'm running the Maple Leafs team in here. But another sentimental part of it, in between these drafts, I suddenly lost my dad. So this pick was sort of an homage and an honor of him. It just made it an easy pick. Wasn't able to trade down, wasn't able to trade up, so I was like, screw it. I was going to take the pick. So that left Hayden at 12th overall, and he kept the D run going. Hayden, how disappointed were you that you didn't get Jamie Drysdale?
I was a little disappointed. Similar to what you said earlier about how that top 8 or top 9 was kind of the blue chip guys. And so I was really hoping one of them would fall. Didn't happen. And then I had talked to a couple of different guys about trading down because just like you said, we were in that sweet spot where I wasn't really feeling like I was getting the value that I wanted out of that pick, but that's just how it goes as soon as you're out of that top tier or top couple tiers of guys. But there wasn't much of a market for trading down. The top guys I wanted were already taken, and it came down to, we hate it as fantasy prospect watchers, but for better or for worse, a player that is taken 5th overall is going to get every opportunity to succeed in their organization, and that's why I went with Jake Sanderson. I agree with the talk earlier. I would have taken Drysdale over him, but that didn't happen. But I was still kind of happy with Sanderson. I do think he's going to get a big role on the Sens in a couple of years. He looks like a smart player, and even though his upside isn't what I would have really hoped for in a first-round pick in this draft, this is a rotisserie pool, multi-category. So everything from points to plus minus to penalties to shots to blocked shots to hits. And having a big minute defenseman that can fill every single category a little bit, but even if they don't fill any particular category a lot, is still good value. So I took Sanderson.
Was anybody kind of shocked that I took Mikko Lehtinen 11th?
Well, you were talking about me making a ballsy pick with Marco Rossi. I mean, I like Mikko Lehtinen, and I think, I mean, he'll play. I mean, I think that's pretty clear. But yeah, I mean, I does he turn out to be the 11th best player coming out of this specific fantasy draft? I don't think there's a.
Nope.
I think
I'll
I
answer
think
that. Nope.
Well, I mean, I think there's a chance. I mean, there's a bunch of guys that might never play and might not play for another 2 years, but you're going to get a guy who's going to step in. So I think there's value there. It's a bit of a different line of thinking, but when I saw that come off the board, I went, okay, and just, I mean, moved on with my life immediately. But it was interesting.
Yeah, there's no way I would have picked him if I had a top 8 or 9 pick, but because I didn't, I didn't feel like there was anybody who had, franchise upside left in the draft. So yeah, I explained my reasons why for doing it already, so I won't double dip on that. Was anybody else kind of blown away?
I did think Lehtinen was going to go in maybe either at the end of the first round or in the middle of the second round at the very latest, because like you alluded to, he's on a super cheap contract and he's going to slot in right away. So he's going to have a tangible effect on our pool. And there's a good chance he's going to get a look on like the second power play unit. So we might even get into that power play category of our multi-cat scoring. So I don't think that was an unreasonable pick to make between the end of the first round and the middle of the second round, assuming you have that spot in your 6 defensive roster spots to fill.
Would anyone else have taken him in the first round? Crickets.
I don't think I would have, but
yeah, maybe second for me, but
sure, second. I'm the new guy, so I'm still trying to figure this out. But what you said earlier makes sense, trying to fit him into the cap and getting a player like you can step right in. I think that makes sense.
All right, so that's the top 12. And now we got back-to-back New York Rangers picks. Brayden, you're up with 2 picks of the last 3 in the round. So why don't you walk us through your train of thought on how you broke these picks down?
Yeah, so both these picks are kind of burnt vividly into my mind. I was slightly occupied at the time that I was making the picks. So I remember going through my queue and looking, and I know that I had both these guys right near the top. I can't remember if they were exactly in that order or what, but I knew I was going to make the Dawson Mercer pick if he was available here for sure. I'd seen quite a bit of him over the last year, both just in his QMJHL competition, but also in the Canada-Russia series. I was really impressed with him in that series. So I knew I was going to make that pick. And that being said, the second one where I took Anthony Duclair was not a foregone conclusion for me. You guys have already gone through the fact that there was, a certain list of players up till about the 8, 9, 10 range that you guys would have been happy picking. And I had a pretty good idea that those were going to be the guys that were gone. If they weren't, I would have taken one of them here, obviously. But Anthony Duclair is another guy, like you alluded to, Pete, who's, I think, on a fairly cost-effective contract right now. He signed for 1.7 in Florida. And I'm kind of in the same boat, probably a little further behind the curve as Will, where I like to say that I'm trying to make a run for it this year. Not necessarily a top 3 finish, but I'd like to be competitive this year, where picking second overall this year, I obviously wasn't in the past season. But getting a guy like Duclair on that fairly affordable contract, I think I'm going to be able to, slot in some further depth into my lineup. I know it was a bit of a ballsy pick, and I thought I might get some eyebrows from it picking in the first round. I think someone made a comment in our draft window there saying that, wow, I could have got a first round pick for Duclair. I don't know who it was who owned him last year and dropped him on his new contract, but apparently they thought they just had to get rid of him for nothing, I guess. So anyways, yeah, I think getting him on that type of a contract is good for me, and having 3 first round picks, obviously, I could afford to take a bit of a unique strategy with the last one.
Yeah, I think he might have been dropped with a clerical error where whoever dropped him, I can't remember who it was now.
It was Anaheim, I believe, who dropped him.
Yeah, I
and
think
he
it was
dropped
Lucas.
him before he signed his new deal. After
that was
some
definitely
of the
Lucas.
rumors had gotten out about the money he wanted with Ottawa. I think it was just assumed that his new contract would be in the 3 or 4 million range, and he wouldn't be able to fit it into his lineup. So he's definitely probably regretting that early drop.
Yeah, and that's a perfect example of what I was saying earlier of how impactful the salary cap and players' contracts are. Any player that's got more than, 4 years of term on his contract better be under 30 years old and better be elite. And anyone who's making anything close to or over double digits better be elite and under 30 years old as well, or they're just not owned in this league anymore. All right, so those were 2 of the last picks. Jack Quinn, New York Islanders were back-to-back to end the first round and start the second. They took Jack Quinn and Seth Jarvis. And then we go right back to Brayden, and he goes with the D, takes Caden Gooley from Montreal. Brayden, what'd you like about him?
Yeah, I mean, to be quite frankly honest, I haven't seen as much of Gooley as I have a lot of other players this year. I watched him at the World Juniors, but I just needed a D, and I had already selected 3 forwards. So, Gooley seemed like the best guy available here, and pulled the trigger.
And then Chinnikov went. I was more surprised by that than me taking Mikko Lehtinen in the first round. I was like a lot of people watching the draft, like, who did Columbus just take? So was anybody familiar with him before he was picked in the NHL draft? Did anyone see him getting picked at all, let alone in the first round? And, do we think he's got business being picked this high in our fantasy draft? Because he went in the first round of my other league too. So, apparently he might just be one of those players who slipped under the radar that not a lot of people were talking about, but should have been.
So I've seen him for the last 2 years, a little bit off and on here and there. I would not at all have picked him in the first round of this year's draft at all. And I think if you were watching for him at the World Juniors this year, you kind of see why. Like, he's not a super mobile guy, but the thing that he's got going for him is his shot. Like, he has a pro shot. It's unreal. The problem, though, is, for example, this year at the World Juniors, I was watching Arseny Gritsyuk, who was the guy who was on his line in junior, I think it was 2 seasons ago. And I always thought that Gritsyuk was the guy doing the dirty work and getting the puck to Chinnikov, and he would just put it in the net because that's what he does. So I think there's value in Chinnikov in terms of him being, a guy that maybe Columbus can round out their game a little bit. Columbus isn't afraid of Triggerman. The other guy they drafted this year is Michael Pitia, who played for Finland this year, and he's basically a Finnish version of that. He's got a really great shot, doesn't get to the net with it a whole lot, just like Chinnikov, but there's tools there that you can work with and see what you can get out of him. Like, if I have Liam Foudy feeding pucks to Igor Chinnikov in 2 years, you're going to score goals, I think. So it's a give and take thing. I personally think that drafting him in the first round was a little out there, but I don't think they had a pick for a while. And so if you think you like the guy, then you take him.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what happened. And I stopped second guessing Jarmo Kekalainen when he took Pierre-Luc Dubois over Puljujärvi in the draft. And I was like, and like everyone at the draft, our jaws all dropped. Like, whoa, what just happened? And in hindsight, that was a pretty astute move. That was the right thing to do. So Columbus, you're back up now. You're on the clock, and Dave, you go with Jacob Perreault. What do you like about Perreault here?
Yeah, so I don't want to say that I regretted my pick, because I'm definitely a massive Trevor Zegras fan, and that was basically the catalyst to pick in Jacob Perreault. All I envision is just Zegras fishing him amazing passes, and Jacob Perreault is definitely able to finish those off. But in hindsight, I actually would have. I don't know really why I didn't go with Rodion Amirov. He was kind of the guy on my queue, and I don't know if it was just the pressure of getting the pick off, but I think Amirov probably had a little more just in terms of the categories, maybe a little bit. He may have been a better choice, but certainly Jacob Perreault. Yeah, like I said, Trevor Zegras feeding him pucks is something that I'm pretty excited for, and I think if anyone's going to be able to finish off in this out of this little group, it's definitely going to be Perreault. So.
Were you disappointed that Chinnikov went 1 point ahead of you, the Columbus guy?
Yeah, maybe if it was in the second round or third round, sorry. I won't lie. When I was watching the actual draft, and obviously I write for Columbus, so I was kind of ready to go to do my write up, just try to get it in right away. And when he said that name, I definitely had to check my notes and go back and watch a few highlights. Just yeah.
You and everybody else, man. All right, so that's Perreault. He's picked 19th overall in the second round. Boston takes NCAA forward Big Dylan Holloway, who looked good for Team Canada at the World Juniors. Then we go to Joel, and he takes Rodion Amirov right there. That was a great pick. And then Nashville's back on the clock. Nick, you get your second pick here. Who's your guy?
My guy was Amirov, but he just got taken.
So, that happens.
So yeah, I went with Reichel. I guess there's a pedigree there with his dad playing in the league, and I like what Chicago has been doing in the past couple of drafts. Even some of the guys that they're signing out of Europe, they seem to have an eye for talent that way. And I was looking at centers. I know that people have already mentioned like the value in centers. And I looked at Bork and I thought maybe I could get him in the third, but then I didn't because he went right away. I think Will got him. And I even looked at Lapierre too, but Lapierre's concussion history and then just like an injury-plagued year scared me a little bit. So, one of the reasons I took Reichel too is this might be just like a blanket statement, but just thinking with everything going on with COVID and all the leagues being backed up here in North America, and then you've got a lot of these younger players still playing over in Europe and getting all those reps, I just figured, why not just take another European player? And Reichel was right there, so that was sort of my mentality around that.
Right on. Yoki takes Hendrix Laperriere, and as you mentioned, that puts Will in the queue at 24th, and he goes with Dallas Stars Maverick Bork. That's a great name. That's a great hockey name, Maverick Bork, and I'm super glad that he was picked by Dallas as well. Will, what's your take on Borky here?
Well, he's a weird one. I'm not surprised he went where he did in the draft, but I think that what you're gonna get out of him is a lot of offense. So my first two picks were kind of like, you need centers, you need guys who might be able to hit, and you need this and you need that. And I got to this point and it's like, all right, now I need guys who can score points. Like that's kind of the thing. And with Maverick Bork, I think he was one of the smartest playmakers that you're going to see, at least in this year's draft. Like he's never out of the play. He makes things out of nothing. There's a lot to like. And so I figured, you know what, looking at who the names are on the board here, my brain kind of went to Bordelot, maybe Brisson, Peterka crossed my mind, but Maverick Bork also plays center mostly. So all of these things kind of came together, and I thought, you know what, his vision and his creativity is something that I want to keep around and see what happens. Even considering, especially since I have Rossi Lundell off the top, so it seemed like a bit of a no-brainer there for me. mostly based off the offense because you need offense.
Yeah. Connor Zary goes right next. He might have been another candidate as well. I know he was highly regarded. And then it's back to Brayden. Brayden, you take Tyson Forrester, Philadelphia Flyers pick. What's your take on Forrester?
So Forrester here, kind of by the same token as Will, where he was looking at Maverick Bork, a lot for what kind of production he'll give him, on the score sheet. Once we got to this point in the draft, I think we're looking at guys who are going to be 2 years down the road for the most part. And God knows where my team's going to be. Like I alluded to earlier, those peripheral stats, I know that to some extent I'm going to be able to rely on the waiver pool or the free agent pool for those peripheral stats, like I say, to some extent. But getting a guy like Tyson Forrester who can put the puck in the net is going to be undeniable value, I think, so long as he does continue to progress and does end up in the NHL. Like I say, 2 years away, probably 2 to 3 years maybe, until we're getting that kind of production out of him. But that's kind of the strategy that I had there, was that it needed to be someone who's going to be able to put points on the board, because otherwise it's you're kind of relying on projection and the fact that a player might just be putting up peripheral stats.
And Hayden, you wrapped your draft up with this next pick. You only had a first and a second, and you picked Brendan Brisson, Vegas Golden Knights. How do you feel about your draft with only 2 guys?
I was trying to get some more picks in the late rounds, in the 4th and 5th. Well, I actually had deals in place that fell through that I don't want to get too sad and mopey on this discussion, but I wish my draft was longer than it was, but I was happy to get Brisson here. Will mentioned him in his kind of short list a couple picks ago, and he's just a good-looking centerman that looks like adapted to the NCAA really well. And we're late enough in the picks now that these are guys that have good upsides, but the chances are there that these guys might not make the NHL, or might even be 50-50 by the time you get by the end of the first round or into the second round of the NHL draft. So you want to take guys that look good and have upside, but also look realistically like they could be NHL players down the road, and you think have a chance of doing that. And everything about Brisson so far makes me confident that in 3 or 4 years he could be an NHL player on Vegas.
Yeah, I like him. I think he's got some upside for sure. So disappointed you only had 2 picks in the draft. And then Columbus, Dave, you had 5. So you went with Lucas Raymond at 5th, and then Jacob Perreault in the second round at 4th overall. Then you had a 3rd, a 4th, and a 5th. You went with Noel Gunler, William Wallinder, and Rasmus Anderson. Couple of D to round out your draft. How do you feel about all the guys you got, all 5 of them?
Well, Noel Gunler is my boom bust. Who knows if he... Carolina I liked Carolina's draft, but actually I wanted Merritt here, and this was another one. So both my second round and my third round, I went back and forth who I was going to pick, but I ultimately went Noel Gunler. Just, that shot is just unreal. In hindsight, like I said, because I already have Perreault, who's a nice trigger man, I probably should have went another route, but I liked Gunler from the get-go, and I just decided to stick to my guns. In terms of the finish off D, that's the one thing that obviously I had some scoring that I picked up, so I definitely had to switch it up and go some D. And I just feel William Wallinder, even though he's a couple years, down the road, I just thought he was a nice prospect that was available out of the crew. There wasn't too many available, so I thought he was a pretty easy pick. And Rasmus Anderson was he was my one free agent signing. And I don't know. I think he has good potential to make some noise this year. And he was a pretty cheap option for me too. I don't have a lot of money to work with, so I thought he was an easy pick for me.
Yeah, he was cut loose, his new contract. So what is he making? Like 4.5 for about 5 or 6 years or something in that neighborhood?
Yeah, something around there. And also, I knew that I probably wouldn't. I know Joel would probably want him at some point, so I knew I probably wouldn't get him in the waiver wire. So I thought I'd just go.
Right. So my take on D and leagues like this is for about $4 million is kind of like my threshold, where if I got a defenseman on my roster that's making $4 million, he better be a superstar. So Rasmus Anderson, not a superstar, but he is only 24 years old, and with the term that they gave him, he's probably going to evolve into their number one defenseman. So while 4.5 million might be kind of a lot for him this year or maybe next, but I think he's really going to grow into that contract nicely, as opposed to some guys who sign 6-year contracts. It's the back end that really kills you. So this is a really curious player, and he's available in my other league too, and I'm eyeballing him. What's anyone else's take on Anderson here? Hayden.
Well, I think the pick is aging well now that we see Anderson getting tried out on Calgary's top power play unit in training camp. So that's looking good.
Yeah, we need Joel to chime in on this one. All right, so that's... Go ahead, Will.
I was gonna say I dropped Anderson, so I'm terrified of that contract, and I need cap money. So enjoy whoever it was. Anyway, whoever's got him, enjoy me. Columbus. Yeah. All right. Have fun.
That's Dave. So tell me about why you dropped him. It's all the contract, right? You don't think he's gonna play into that contract?
I think a lot of it also was in that. I think it was Hayden who brought it up. A big thing, or with the Cody Glass trade, I managed to get Sean Walker in that deal as well. And I think Sean Walker, isn't Rasmus Anderson, but he's about half the money. And I also have a lot of young defensemen on the way that might need some space. So, sadly had to drop him.
Yeah, what sucks about it is you weren't able to move him and recover anything for the asset besides cap space. I mean, and
nobody wanted him.
$4.5 million worth of cap space is valuable. No one wanted him because they all knew that you were going to drop him and he'd be available for free. Okay, so that moves us on to Edmonton. And Mark, you had 3 picks. You didn't pick until super late, so you haven't had a lot to say in this draft yet. But you come away with Jason Barron and Alexander Barabanov and Sebastian Aho, the defenseman version of Sebastian Aho. How much did it suck not picking until the end of the draft?
Yeah, so I mean, it's not fun sitting back and watching it all go down. Although I did kind of enjoy watching you guys, who you liked and what you guys did with this draft. But continuing with the theme, my strategy was kind of to not draft. I had traded my second rounder last season for I don't remember what, and I had also traded my first, which ended up being the last one of the first round in another deal. But then I had gotten, I think it was Anaheim's, I can't remember, but that was the 14th pick. And basically what happened there is that with the expansion draft, I had a lot of good young defensemen that I couldn't find a way to protect. And I kind of panicked a bit and started trying to trade away a lot of them. Some of them probably for nickels on the dollar, and others maybe for, hopefully good value. But so I ended up with not a whole lot in the cupboard for defense. And I ended up trading the 14th pick for Ty Smith. So the way I look at it, my first round was, Cody Glass and Ty Smith. So I'm pretty happy with that. And then I had a pick. What would have been my first pick was in the middle of the 4th round. And I was ready to make that pick. And I couldn't tell you who I was going to take at that point. It might have been Justin Barron, or it might have been somebody else on my list. I wish I could remember. But Will sent me a last minute deal because he knows I like to make trades. And it was one I couldn't refuse. He sent me Jan Jenik for what turned out to be round 4, pick 6, so pick 51. And yeah, he took Daniil Gushin there. So I'm okay with that. Like, I'm a fan of Jan Jenik, and he's close to playing, and I sort of tend towards those kind of guys, especially later in the draft if I can. Justin Barron, that was my first pick at pick 60 at the end of the 4th round, and he was kind of like, again, being sort of light on defense, and he was on my list. He was the highest one left, and in fact I think he dropped really far in my opinion. I mean, he's not flashy or like considered one of the high end offensive defensemen, but I think he's kind of like Hayden was talking about earlier, he's one of those defensemen who's kind of good at everything but not great at any one thing, and I'm hoping that he makes the NHL and doesn't sign a massive contract, but is useful for me for a few years. And then my next 2 picks were pretty much near the end. I think the 2nd and 3rd last picks of the draft. And at this point, on looking at my 2020 list, there's not much left that I'm interested in. I'm looking for cheap players that I think could help me this year as call-ups, but not a lot of upside. That's sort of low risk picks that I can use. So Barabanov, right now he's looking like probably a 4th liner, but he could contribute in a few different categories if I have an injury or something like that. It doesn't cost a lot. And Sebastian Aho, the defenseman, not the forward, he's had, some pretty good. He's been pretty good over the last few years, and looked good when he had a little bit of time in the NHL. And he was really good last year in the AHL. I don't know that if he will or won't get a lot of time with the Islanders this year, but he should certainly probably be on the taxi squad. And I think if he gets a chance, he could be another one of those sort of all-around defensemen that could help me out on a cheap contract.
Yeah, there's some value in that with having players who are kind of on the bubble of the team, kind of maybe on the taxi squad or wherever, go up and down from the minors. You can move them from your prospect bench to your active roster when they get recalled and sent down. If you're lucky, it coincides with when another player on your team gets injured. They have super duper low salary caps, so you can call them up, move them down, call them up, and move them down if they're in the NHL, and fit them in and get some games played in your roster that, if it's on the end of the week and you've got no one playing on a Sunday and the Leafs are playing and Barabanov is in the lineup, then you can, swap out, make a roster move and add him in and get an extra push in your hits category maybe. So back to Will, Minnesota. You had like 8 picks or whatever it was, 8 or 9 picks. We went over a lot of them.
Yep.
Yeah, you had 2 firsts and 2 seconds. So Rossi Lundell, Maverick Bourque, Thomas Bordeleau. So far, so good. And then the 3rd round, you go Murat Kushnedinov. Now, there isn't a more polarizing player from the draft class than Murat Kushnedinov. A lot of the NHL media guys really love him. And then I noticed that a lot of the prospect writers and whatnot, not so fond. I'm the Dobbers Draftcast guys, they don't really like him at all. Cam has a certain amount of disdain for him, I believe. You picked him 35th overall, so obviously you're more on the you like him side than you don't.
I mean, I had him ranked, I think, higher than anyone last year. Cam can also screw off. He is he is known for being wrong from time to time.
Everybody.
Sure. But yeah, I mean, with Murat, I had him ranked really high, but I knew he would be available later. I mean, the big thing with me and him, now there's a bunch of centers that I've got off the board in the first few rounds. Murat is a guy who throws his weight around. He is small, but he certainly puts it all out there on the ice. I was very impressed to see him playing first line center for the Russian team this year, even though they didn't do a whole lot. I thought that he had a pretty good tournament overall. Not spectacular, but he'll probably be back next year. SKA St. Petersburg seems to really love him. I follow all their Russian language social media just to keep up, and he's all over it. Not that automatically makes him a very highly valuable player. But everything I've heard about him is so interestingly positive. Again, brand loyalty to the Minnesota Wild. So I'm just a huge fan of what he brings to the table. I think looking back on this draft already, the fact that Jason Peterka went 2 picks later, maybe would have been nice to have him. But I think Kuznetsov is going to be a guy who, in maybe not 2 years, but few more years of getting stronger and more comfortable against better competition. Just the way that guy plays the game, if it's anything like that in the KHL in a couple of years that it is in the MHL, then I'm all about it. I just want to see what's going to happen with this guy's career.
Yeah, sorry, I got confused. Kuznetsov. I was thinking Mukhamadullin. He's a polarizer player.
Yeah, no, I didn't touch that guy. No way.
There you go. Yeah. Okay. So, and your next pick, Ozzy Weisblatt. I really like that pick. That's a player who, if he makes it in the NHL, is going to not be a superstar. So he'll never make, $10 million contract. He'll always be an affordable player. He might not score a whole lot of points at the NHL level, but he'll contribute in a whole lot of other categories too. So I really like that pick. I picked him in my other league. And then you've got Daniel Gushin and Topi Niemela rounding out your draft. So those are some great picks there, man. You must be really happy with all of those guys.
Yeah, I kind of, when I picked the team up, I kind of leveraged people being willing to trade draft picks, and I was kind of in a situation where my team, when I picked them up in Florida, they were just kind of middling and not doing a whole lot. So people seemed willing to hand over picks, and I knew that 2020 might be a pretty good draft. So I kind of stocked up. A couple of names I liked slipped, and I had some space on my roster. There were some old guys that I managed to offload, some new contracts that I want nothing to do with. So, turned over some roster space, added some guys, maybe one that's going to play this year. And so I thought overall, yeah, it's a lot of picks, but I've got a lot of other guys that are kind of hopefully ready to hit the NHL in the not too distant future.
Right. And Nashville, you had like 7 or 8 picks as well. So Nick, you did your expansion draft. You had all kinds of room, I believe, on your roster for picks, and you were able to pick up a couple of picks in trades and whatnot, probably for taking crappy contracts from guys in the expansion draft. So you walk away with Askarov in the first, Lucas Reichel in the second, which we talked about. Then you went German again and took Peterka. And you got Luke Evangelista, and then you just crushed my world and took Zayd Wisdom. I thought for sure I'd be able to get him. And Lucas Cormier, and then Luke Shen. So the interesting thing for me there is you went almost all futures here. Luke Shen is the only active player that you selected, and I don't really see anyone out of your draft that is going to contribute right away, maybe even including Shen. So you're definitely looking at all futures here, right?
Big time. Yeah. Like I was saying before, I've never been in a draft where you've got so many things to factor in, from futures to current players that are going to contribute, and then the cap too. So many factors. I figured I'd keep it simple and just go futures and try and load up on prospects. Yeah, the Shen one, that was sort of a panic move. I didn't want to hold up the draft when that was my pick, and I was trying to just to squeeze somebody in that had a reasonable contract, so that I could maybe make some more moves in the waivers when that got started. But yeah, I'm happy with what I got. I was definitely listening to a couple of your podcasts. I think you were talking to Craig Button about Wisdom, and you guys were both really excited about him and just being a buzzsaw, and again, all those peripheral stats too. So yeah, I don't mean to burst your bubble, but you kind of tipped me off on that too. But
you.
Yeah.
Well, you're gonna have to trade him to me then. That's all there is to it. So I'll overpay for him. So
there's the incentive. There you go.
I'm gonna throw my hat into that ring too. I was really mad to see him go off the board immediately after Daniel Gushin. I was hoping he'd slip. No. So yeah, I'll be in those trade talks too, I think.
Yeah. Well, have a look at my roster there, pal, and pick someone off my prospect bench or whatever that you like. I got lots of good players. Dmitry Chimishov, Looking good on the Islanders. If you want a Nashville guy, I'll give you Yakov Trenin for him. So
This is not a free advertising space, Peter. We need equal
we can
volume if
talk.
we're going to get to shout about all of our trade bait in our
we'll
minors
talk offline.
benches.
You're right. We'll talk offline. Okay, so then we got two more teams left to analyze their draft. That's me and Brayden. So Brayden, you had a bunch of picks too, man, and you had 3 in the first round and 3 in the second. So we kind of covered most of your picks: Byfield, Mercer, Declare, Gooley, Forrester, Brayden Shen, and then you had a 3rd and a 5th. You go Vasily Ponomarev and Jumbo Joe Thornton in the 5th round. How excited were you about your draft, man? You were very busy. You made all kinds of trades, all kinds of picks. You were all over this draft.
Yeah. Looking back at it, kind of in aggregate, I was all over the place. Really, I was. I'm happy with it though. I got 2 of the prospects that I really liked watching in the queue over the last year. In Dawson Mercer and Ponomarev. So that makes me happy as far as futures go. And then kind of in contrast to that, like we talked about earlier, I picked Duclair at the end of the first round and finished the draft off with Joe Thornton. So 2 guys on fairly affordable 1-year contracts that, by the looks of it right now, are both in training camp lining up on their respective team's first line. I don't know if Thornton's still there, but I saw here yesterday that Duclair's slotting in right next to Barkov and Huberdeau. So if those stand pat like that, I'll be ecstatic about how I came out of the draft in terms of, like I say, both futures and current players that are going to contribute on affordable contracts for me.
It's a fine draft. I really like that Dawson Mercer pick. That's who I picked in the first round in my other draft. So that leaves one last team to review. Myself, I went Maple Leafs heavy. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not ashamed about it. And I only had the first round pick, Mikko Lehtinen, 11th overall, and then late picks, 50, 56, and 71. And I went Wayne Simmons, kind of the same idea. Cheap player, fill in my my forward roster, or let some guys go. Cheap contract, peripheral stats. I'm not expecting him to score double-digit goals this season, but he could have a pile of hits and a pile of penalty minutes. And I think the Leafs might stick him in front of the net on the power play, so he might get a few power play points as well. Alexei Melnichuk rounded out my goaltending depth. I was a little thin, and I have Bishop in goal, so if there's any chance that he can come in and wrestle a starting position away in San Jose, it's not out of the realm of possibilities with the competition that he's looking at. And then I rounded out my draft with the Leafs long-term prospect and Ronnie Hirvonen. So that was the draft, boys. What was everyone's favorite part of fantasy strategy? How did your fantasy strategy work out for you is a better question. Not good.
I hope it worked. I hope it worked well.
We all think
I'll
that.
tell you in 3 years.
Yeah, right.
Are we anointing a winner? Has anybody anointed a winner?
No, we haven't.
I feel like that's up to the commish, but
I think you're right.
I think it's too early to call a winner. I think a lot of people had good drafts. At this point, it's easiest to call the winner just the people who had the most picks and have that many good lottery tickets to turn out. But I'm definitely not going to call Will a winner.
Neither will I.
No, can't
honestly,
do that.
If I had to throw one out there, I'd say Calgary had a good one. Only 4 picks, but you come away with Drysdale, Amirov, Zari, and Robbins. That's pretty solid.
Calgary was the team that most consistently stole the next guy I was going to take. And it was especially painful because in most rounds he picked 2 picks before me. And almost every single round I was sending him messages I can't repeat on this podcast. So that's a good point, Will. That's a good way to judge who won the draft.
Anaheim had an interesting draft as well. He picked Bobby Ryan, Eric Holla, Pius Suter, Carl Soderberg, and Ryan Miller. No futures there at all. These are all 20 plus something, 30 plus something players. Didn't have his earliest pick was 28th overall, and that was Bobby Ryan. which I was happy to let someone else pick. I didn't want any part of that. But that is an interesting draft strategy, right? Like that's just something that's totally different. So I'd have to look at Lucas's team and see like his prospect bench just really flush, that he's not worried about the futures, and maybe he's got some cap problems. And you just need to get some cheaper players because these guys should all have, small cap hits going into the season. I thought that was interesting as well.
Well, it's good that we had an example of someone who's clearly going for it and doesn't give a crap about the future, because Anaheim, that team in our pool, has been near the top of the standings for the last 3 years, and he clearly doesn't want to give up that streak, even if that means spending all 5 of his draft picks on guys that are on like 1-year deals.
Kind of like Anaheim Detroit holding on to that long 25-year playoff streak, and they mortgaged the future just to make the playoffs, and they didn't really think they were going to go anywhere as long as they made the playoffs, and now they're recouping from that. So I'm predicting in a few years, Lucas might have some pain.
Lucas, if you're listening, Peter just said you're not going anywhere.
No. A few years down the road, I hope I don't meet Lucas in the playoffs this year, because like you said, his team's pretty solid. Nashville's GM. New addition to the league, expansion draft, entry draft. That's so you got to be loving this league, man. That's a lot, and we haven't even had hockey yet. Hockey hasn't even started, and you've already had a lot to do in this league. So that must be fun, eh?
That was fun. At first, it was overwhelming, a lot to take in. But when everyone was looking for an excuse to sink their teeth into anything fantasy, I was scrolling through spreadsheets and looking at past drafts and working the Twitter messaging back and forth and the email. So that was a lot of fun to dive right in the middle of the fall. So pretty excited to get involved. It's you guys are already a good group of guys, and it should be fun leading up to this week.
Right on. So this has been going on. I think it's time to wrap it up. Thanks for coming on, everybody. And as I mentioned, these guys are all hockey writers, covering teams for Dobber Prospects or in addition to other places. So just a final quick roll call. So if anyone is listening wants to know where we can find some of your thoughts and contributions and work, Hayden, you cover the Toronto Maple Leafs for Dobber Prospects. Do you write anywhere else?
I cover Colorado and Toronto for Dobber Prospects, and usually in the mid-season and off-season Dobber reports, but that's about it for the moment.
And your Twitter handle?
Good luck spelling my last name. It's Soboleski H.
Soboleski? Something like that. And Dave, Columbus. You cover the Columbus Blue Jackets for us. What's your Twitter handle, Dave?
Hall 1289.
Hall, Hall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also cover Florida as well.
Double dipping. 2 guys double dipping. Right on. And Mark, you've been with Dobber Prospects for a while now. You cover the Edmonton Oilers. What's your Twitter handle?
Well, I used to do Detroit. I did the Red Wings for a couple of years. I'm not writing right now. I'm real life's getting in the way. Plus all my fantasy teams. I've got too many, I think. But you can find my opinions on my Twitter at Angry Puck.
Real life sucks. Fantasy hockey writing is way better. Will Scouch, Minnesota Wild. What's your Twitter handle and where all do you write for, man?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at Scouching. I write for McKean's Hockey. I'm a contributor there. We've got a nice monthly installment series looking at prospect development that's on the way. Just finished the second one, so that's all good. There's also a YouTube channel at Scouching as well, so that's a nice little starter kit.
Yeah, I'm on Team McKean's this season too. It's a good good team to be with. The yearbook is fantastic, by the way. If you haven't got it, subscribe, download. And I saw that Rob posted that they actually made a limited print version of it this year, which I must own. Brayden Olofson, New York Rangers, Associate Editor, New York Rangers Prospect Writer. What's your Twitter handle, Brayden, and what else do you write about?
Yeah, just the Rangers right now is all I'm writing, Pete. My Twitter handle is Olaf1393, same format as Dave, 4 letters, 4 numbers. Olaf like the snowman. And yeah, no, just like I say, for the most part, just writing for the Rangers and actually doing a lot of work with Tony Ferrari and our scouting group with Dauber Prospects, doing some regional evaluation of prospects, draft eligible prospects in the queue this year. So that's been a lot of my time this year, dedicating a lot of effort to that.
And you're doing good stuff, man. And last but not least, the Nashville expansion guy, Nick. What's your Twitter handle and what do you write?
The Twitter handle is Nicholas Kawka, so NicholasKawka. Just writing for Dauber, just on the Nashville prospect side.
And an excellent addition to the team and the pool you've been. Boys, thanks very much for joining me on this podcast. I hope everyone who listened to it found some value. Maybe you got some strategies for your own drafts that may or may not be hopefully coming up soon, as the NHL season is gearing up for what we hope will be as complete as it can be anyways, season. And then maybe next season things start kind of sliding back into the normal routine and schedule. All right, so that's it for this episode. Thanks very much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, go ahead, hit that 5-star review, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Thanks, boys. See you in the league, and we'll talk offline. Zig Wisdom Trade, bud.